It doesn't matter how good your analysis is or how helpful it would be or how impactful it would be. If you can't communicate those results to the people that matter, that are making the decisions, that are doing the actions, then it's not very helpful.
This is Michelle Dunivan. She's the Senior Director of Insights and Analytics at Best Friends Animal Society. And what's remarkable is that she has a PhD in communication. Michelle is that rare analytics leader who speaks both data and human.
Don't rush through the slides because you're very familiar with them. Don't talk the whole time because you think that you need to fill the space. You have to create that, visually we love white space.
She has led teams across different industries, but always turning complex analysis into real-world impact. And in this episode, you will learn why your first stakeholder conversation shapes the outcome, not your slides, the number one move to lock in executive buy-in, the unexpected reason why your best work gets ignored, and lastly, a quick test to know if your insights clicked or confused everybody. Let's get into it. Michelle, thank you for joining today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
What stands out in your profile to me is that you have a lot of experience in analytics, but also you have a PhD in communication. And of course, that makes me wonder, from all the things you've learned over time about communication and communicating in data, what is one thing, one tip, one framework, one hack, however you want to call it, something you use almost every day that you can share?
That's a great question. I love to continually think about how we are communicating in an audience-centric or a person-centric way. So really focusing on the person we're speaking to, not about our needs, but about what their needs are and how they're going to hear what we have to say. So thinking about it from their perspective in what is their knowledge base, what is their experience, what are their fears, and thinking about that from that perspective is really going to be how you're going to be the most competent communicator, is to understand that it's not just what you say. You're not just telling the truth, you are telling one truth, and how you tell that truth to the other person is going to be the difference between whether you have an impact on them or they turn away.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned you're telling a truth, right? Not the truth. And many people that work in data, they assume that, hey, I've done my job, I've analyzed the data, so here's the only single truth there is, and I'm going to communicate it right now. Mm-hmm. What do you have to say to that?
Data is a piece of the story. It's not the whole story. It is what we know based on what we can quantify. It's what we have available to us. It's a place in time. It's how we interpreted the different pieces of the model or the algorithm and how we're interpreting the results. There's books written about how you can lie with statistics, and you can if you want to. And so you can cherry pick if you want to with statistics. So there isn't just one truth. I would reject that holistically, that there is one truth with data. And I would also acknowledge that even if you've done the very best that you can and you feel so confident and your error bars are so teeny tiny, there is always a way of interpreting what that means or what that means for the future or the impact that will have or the what are the next steps? That's all interpretable, and that's based on your experience. But the experience isn't the data, right? That's something separate. So
yeah, very clear. And if you talk about audience-centric communication, of course, first you need to understand what is important for them, right? Or what is their truth, or what their mind state and their world, what they believe in. How do you do that? Because I know that many analysts or data scientists, they love data, but not always love communication and love talking with stakeholders who they not even know. So how do you do that?
Oh, it's the strangest paradox for me that the analysts are the most curious people in the world. It's what sets analysts apart from everybody else. And a good analyst is, the more curious they are, the more they want to know about the world around them, the more they want to get to that answer. They want to fully get it. The better they're going to be at their job. But then you switch over into this person-centric realm and suddenly they don't want to have anything to do with it. And that's not across the board, but you do see it pretty commonly that there is that very different feeling when it comes to being curious about people and maybe the business as well. So I do think it's very interesting that we'll ask a million questions about a data set. We'll ask a million questions about a phenomenon. But when it comes to working with the business stakeholders, we don't necessarily want to know about them personally. Maybe we feel it's intrusive. Maybe we feel like it's none of our business. Maybe we feel like it's a waste of time. It's that soft skill stuff. Who cares about it? But obviously, you and I would agree that that is the business. That is the work that's being done. It doesn't matter how good your analysis is or how helpful it would be or how impactful it would be. If you can't communicate those results to the people that matter, then that are making the decisions, that are doing the actions, then it's not very helpful. And by the same token, if you're not listening, like truly actively listening to what they have to say. So being curious, asking the right questions, and then listening for the response, not just confirming what you already believe to be true or, sticking to the thing that you feel comfortable with, because when the tables are turned, it's uncomfortable to acknowledge that maybe you don't know something, that, you're in the business of having the answers. And so being vulnerable and being willing to ask those questions and be interested in that person, it's counterintuitive for a lot of people. They think that people aren't going to like them if they are asking too many questions or if they don't know the answers to things. But other people like to be experts the exact same way we like to be experts. And so I would also just turn that around to, we have to, it's an imperative to be audience centric. If we can't speak to them, then our analysis stays in a bubble and it's not useful. It's not adding value at that point.
Yeah, and that's something that many analysts care about, right? That their work makes an impact or their work drives action instead of feeling useless.
I would say it's the only thing that most analysts care about. Is they love playing with the data, but only because they can see how it has an impact. If it doesn't have an impact, why are they there? I see it with software developers too. They are sitting here toiling away, and when something pivots, they feel like, I just put my, months or years into developing this product that nobody's ever going to see. And that's heartbreaking for somebody, because you come to work, you spend so much time here. And a lot of times you do get really invested. You're putting so much time and effort into it. And you're probably expanding your own skill set through these projects. And to see it go away that's not the job. We're not building widgets here. It's not like, oh, that it didn't work. Oh, well, no, we really care about the work that we're doing.
Yeah. So that's maybe a way how to see it. I love the mindset about curiosity as well, because it's true. Like, all analysts I know are super curious about the data and sometimes also about self-reflection. And if they could be equally or maybe be more curious about stakeholders and making the impact and how to get there, it would change the whole story.
Yeah, I agree.
I also think is one important element of communication in analytics is to translate. And what I saw in your LinkedIn headline is that you mentioned plain language stats translator. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think that's a huge piece of the puzzle. So in leadership, I love being in leadership. I love being able to talk to all different parts of the organization, all different levels of the organization, and really figure out how we make our work impactful and meaningful to executives and to frontline staff, right? And so when you're trying to figure out how to bridge that gap, as educated or smart or experienced as people are in every level of the organization, they don't know what we know. And so bridging that, so if we come to them with, the random forest model said this, and so we didn't use it because of that, that doesn't resonate. That's not helpful. It might, make you feel better and feel more confident that I got to the right answer, but it doesn't say the same thing to them. What they want to know is, they don't want to feel stupid in that moment either, right? And so it's a bit of an opportunity to bridge that gap. And I love that with my teams, being able to get into all the data nerdy stuff and learn about the random forest piece of the equation, but then helping them to say, okay, but this is how it's going to be used across the organization. This is how it's expected to have an impact. And so what do they actually need to know about it? And putting that in a way that is meaningful and understandable. So when you're saying something like correlated, that doesn't means something to a lot of people. That is even something as simple as that, where it's like that word is used in common language. So everybody kind of understands, but they don't really understand just how, how specifically we are using that language. And so we can't assume that that actually is meaningful. And then in the same way, I also feel like my job as a translator is to kind of interrupt some of the academic speak that we tend to get into with like, I'm going to put all of the limitations up front, or I'm going to tell you how I did all of the work up front, because that is, again, not something, it's something that's so important to the process, but it's just a distraction. It makes people feel like they actually need to, in my experience, what I've seen is that when you present that information, the end user, the audience, they feel like they need to become more educated to be able to make a decision, as opposed to being able to rely on your decision. And so really figuring out how to translate those complex situations into something that is meaningful and accessible. Really, it's all about accessibility.
Yeah. Instead of trying to prove that you've done all the hard work and got to the right conclusion, right? Because many people are not interested in that. They trust the people in front of them that they've done the analysis, done their work. And you mentioned you sit down with your team and see, okay, how can we make this more accessible? What are the steps you take? Because of course, I can imagine you do that based on instinct or experience, right? You don't really have like step 1, 2, 3, 4. But if we would go there, like what are some of the internal check marks that you do to gauge whether the presentation is good? So we can explore together, because I'm sure you don't have that checklist, but it's in your head, and let's get to it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that, and I haven't explored that before. What my process is to do that, but I know that the first thing that we do is, it actually probably starts in the requirements gathering stage. Do you really know and understand what is being asked of this? And maybe even just helping them with whatever knowledge I have about why that was requested, maybe more globally, why was that requested? Make sure you include this, or I wouldn't focus on that too much. And in fact, one of my team members who took your class, your training that you did, she came back and kind of dug deeper into requirements in one of her subsequent meetings, and said that whole framework of AVP, and we can talk about that later, is really helpful to her in being able to get down to like, okay, you asked for this, and I don't need to turn around and provide that right away. We need to be, again, curious at the very beginning. What does that actually mean? How are we interpreting that? And then, so send the staff away with some action items and a reasonable time frame, and then come back and talk to me about it. I want to see what's going on, because I'm curious and I'm excited, and I think that this is a cool, worthwhile thing that I'm going to provide, we're going to prioritize and we're going to do instead of something else. And I want to see what's going on. And then again, I can put my lens and I can help them understand, they may have only had 1 or 2 meetings, but maybe I've been in several adjacent meetings that would give a little bit more context about how that's helpful. So, again, as a rule, looking at what are those first slides? Are those first slides, is that the bottom line up front? Or is it, this is how many people we surveyed, and this is how many rows of data we cleaned? And like, that stuff is important. It's so, so, so important. And I want to hear that from my team, because I know they want somebody to hear all of the work that they put into it and how valid and valuable it is. And then I move it to the appendix, right? That's something that we can go back to if we need it. And if somebody actually has a question about that, we have it. And I'm so glad that you did it and you documented it, but it's not the first thing that we're going to talk about. So really sifting through. And then I would say, like, getting a sense of, I feel like we go through these things and we hoped to get 10 answers, and 6 of them we don't actually have a good answer for, right? Either we didn't have the good enough data, or we didn't, it came out to be like it's flat, or it's like positive in this one aspect and it's negative in this other aspect, and they cancel each other out. And so it's not a really exciting thing. It's not a takeaway. And so this is where we get into, okay, what does the audience need to hear? What do they need to take away? If we found out that this is kind of a wash, we need to tell them that, but that's probably not the first thing we want to lead with, right? We want to talk about what are the actionable things that we think from our experience we can add. And so, we maybe started out with 10. Can we narrow it? Can we narrow it to 2 to 4 different things that are really like, these are the things that stood out to us as unexpected or counterintuitive or, bigger than we thought or not as important as we thought. We've been focusing so much on this and we're not seeing that it actually has an impact. So maybe let's adjust now. And so kind of recalibrating what we even focus on. And then the slides themselves, right? It's important to have slides. People expect you to have slides. They don't want an entire long report. In my experience with the groups that I've worked with. So you want the slides and you want them to have enough information that they know that you were thorough, but not so much information that they're distracted by the slides themselves. And so figuring out how do we use the real estate on that one slide to be as impactful as possible? Can we have the takeaway? And this is a challenge that I've had with lots of teams, is especially when you're coming from an academic background, you think, well, I can't be biased in any way. I have to wait until the discussion section to tell what I actually think about this situation. And that's where we need to flip things and say, like, no, you're going to be bold. And even if they disagree with you, you come at it with a position statement. This is what this means, and this is what we think you should do with it as a result. And here's maybe a chart that kind of explains it. Or just a big number, or just, a very simple bar chart, something that can we take those really complex analyses and maybe even just list, here are the 7 variables that we actually found have an impact on the bottom line.
That's something I see people don't do enough, because they don't want to be biased, as you mentioned. They see like, hey, it's not my job to include a recommendation. It's their job to figure that out, right? I just present the data, the insights. There you go. I did my job. Fantastic. My methods are deep and solid. Now it's your job to determine what's the next step. But even if you don't know what's going to be the next step, you can always do some suggestions, right? Or say, hey, this is what we need to discuss right now. At least have some forward momentum.
I love that. And you're reminding me of one of the projects where we kind of went through this process that I'm talking about. And at one point in the process, the next step was, okay, here's the results that you think stand out. Now your next action item is, can you make us a list of possible action items, like takeaways, and what do other people do now that they have this information? You don't have to know the one thing. I think that that's a lot of pressure also, is like for an analyst to say, here's how the entire organization should start behaving, right? Like that is a lot of pressure, and it doesn't feel authentic to them. They don't know what the entire organization should do. I don't know what the entire organization should do, but we can start with a list of, here's some possible things. And so, the natural next step is then let's bring the stakeholders back in. Here's what you asked for. Here's what we have so far. Do any of these things resonate with you? Do you agree with this? Was there something we missed? Is there another, like this actually didn't turn out the way we expected? Do you think there's something else we should be considering? And so having some of those intermediate conversations before you just present to a large group or present to the final group is really, really important, to have those engaged stakeholders throughout the process, but not so much in the deep analytics piece of it. I feel like that's, again, another very overwhelming thing that it's not really a good use of their time. Even if they're really interested, or even if they want to move into data and analytics, getting into the very deep nitty gritty, like that's a long process, and not as simple and straightforward as I think a lot of people expect it to be, but definitely at the appropriate time to bring them in and be willing to redo some analyses even at that point.
Yeah. And it sounds like you suggest to make it more like a conversation, and still, instead of waiting until the end and doing the presentation and not having any conversations before, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, again, one of those person-centric approaches that I think is so important to these processes, is like, can you get buy-in along the way? You don't have to just sit in your bubble and do the best that you can and hope that you're going to be compelling enough to get that buy-in. If I'm meeting with our executive leadership team, I have definitely shopped these ideas to the vast majority of the people who are in that meeting, and I have addressed the concerns even if it's just to say it's a concern, but it's, it's worth the risk, right?
Right.
It is not a surprise. People don't, these are complex ideas. And even when we simplify them, people still need time to wrap their heads around it. It's not something that they are going to get immediately. And I think that that's something about not only your presentation style, but your preparation style. So how do you bring people along, those stakeholders along the way? But then even in the meeting, even when you've talked to people, don't rush through the slides because you're very familiar with them. Don't talk the whole time because you think that you need to fill the space. You have to create that, visually we love white space. Audibly, we also need a little bit of white space to think through it in the moment so that we can have a meaningful conversation. I think that's another thing, is like leaving some of those big meetings without a decision or without a direction or without a next step is it's just an unnecessarily delay. Like really set yourself up to get that next step out of that meeting, even if it's an approval, like that's done. Like, what is it that you want out of this conversation, even at the very highest level?
Yeah. And that goal-oriented behavior is not something I see very often with analysts or data teams in general. And you also mentioned buy-in, like getting, you mentioned if you present something for leadership, you make sure to get people's buy-in before, address concerns. How do you do that practically? Do you have a meeting with them? Do you have a call? Do you do that via email, chat? What's your approach?
Yeah. So I'm very lucky that the organization that I work in is very data driven. They love data, and they're very collaborative. So those are two hurdles that I know are not in every organization. I've been in organizations where those two things do not exist, and it's much more difficult. So I'm kind of coming at this right now from a very privileged space where when I reach out to leaders and I say, we've got some initial results for you, and I'd love to see what your perspective is on them. They're excited to see what that first analysis is. And over the years, when we take their feedback into consideration and we take it seriously and we show them that they're a partner, not just in name, but really in how we operate, it keeps them invested in our success because our success becomes their success. They see that we've made it easier or simpler or more straightforward for them to get their work done and accomplish their goals. So yeah, absolutely. Meetings are my best way of doing it. Writing these things like in an email is I've never seen it work. It's too complex. There's too many things to navigate. I mean, maybe if you're talking about one very specific tiny part of a process, that might be helpful. But yeah, having those meetings and taking it, again, going back to communication, listening, like really hearing what they're saying, not just that when they're giving you feedback, that it's an idea that you could consider, but that you take it seriously, that you actually internalize it and figure out, how did we miss the mark? Not that you should feel bad about that, because this is all a process. None of this stuff has ever been done before. We're the first people that have ever done this analysis. That's why we have to have these meetings. That's why we have to get this buy-in. And so it shouldn't be expected that it would be perfect the first time around. We're not, we spend our days looking at tables and columns, like we can't be expected to know the reality of what's happening on the business side in every single way. And so we have to work together with them. And so that's, in the event that we do have something where there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of there's risks, but there's also rewards, and we've got to make some decisions. There's got to be a decision about if it's worth it or not. Here's all the reasons I believe it's worth it, or I believe it's not worth it. And ultimately, I don't get to make all of the decisions either. And so when I can also be respectful of the fact that they maybe went against something that I wanted, but they had their good reasons, and we can, I think one of the leaders in my organization always says, disagree, but commit. Like, can you understand that we don't agree on this, and yet we're going to move forward together because we have to move forward together.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And also that you say oh, you don't need to have it perfect, right? Because it takes some of the burden off the shoulders of many analysts who think hey, I first need to perfect my work before I show it. And if people don't agree, then it's also saying something about me, maybe making it personally, triggering defensive. But of course, it's that's not necessarily true, or in most cases at least.
Right. Right.
You also mentioned conflict, and of course there are always so many competing goals and different interests, and even if people are more data driven, there's going to be some difficult situations, right? Do you have any experiences or tips to share on that front?
Yes, actually. I was once in an interview for a nonprofit board role, and they asked to give an example of recent conflict, and I said just one, because I see that conflict it abounds. It's always out there, and we always I think conflict gets a bad rap because it can be uncomfortable, and we have created it to be a negative thing, but it doesn't have to be. It's just that we have different goals, right? And we see the other person's goal as an impediment to our own goal. And so when you can break it down that way, where you can say, clearly we are trying to get different things out of this, and it doesn't have to be a me or you. Like, how can we figure out, like, what is the crux of this? Can we go a little bit deeper and figure out, like, I think a lot of times there's also this expectation of, I thought this was going to be easy. I thought I was going to get buy-in right away on this project. And now you're impeding that. And I have a deadline. And why are you asking all of these questions? So, and they're saying, well, why are you trying to force this? Like, we're not ready for this, or we're, and so you see what that is. And then you can go, let's figure this out. So why do you, it's again, that goes back to that curiosity. Why is this deadline so urgent? Or why, what's the fear associated with us moving in this new direction? And you can really start asking some of those questions. Sometimes you can find a way that you're really not in conflict at all. Something that happened recently, we're still in the crux of it, actually, is a project where we're trying to collect more data about what's happening internally in some of our programs. And there's two groups who really want this data, but they want it for different reasons. Right. So they have very different goals. One is a very internal goal. One's a very external goal. They're both so important. And my team is in the middle trying to like mediate what happens next, and how do we get continued buy-in for this project, because it's very, very, very important, and it has the potential to help both teams tremendously. But understanding how those disparate needs are coming together has been a challenge, and it has been a matter of expressing each side of the debate and figuring out where we where are our boundaries, why do we have those boundaries, and at some point, do we need to escalate? Is this something that's really out of all of our hands? And this was something that was very important to leadership. And that's another thing that I think is very, very important to analytics projects, is you have to have executive buy-in. These are very rarely successful from the ground up. So if the people from the ground up are doing the work and they're at an impasse, maybe it's time to bring back in that leader that can help to explain, where is the commonality between all of these things? Where is that priority level? What's the more urgent thing? What do we do first and then meet the other person's needs? What is the immediate need versus the long-term need? What is how much am I willing to give of my team? How much am I willing to bend to meet the other team's needs? Ultimately, we're all one organization. We're all helping each other, but we all have limited bandwidth. And so it's been a very interesting project. And I think it's that conflict, though, and being very open about it, and being willing to have those conversations in that meeting, and creating a safe place where people can say what they dislike or what they need, and not be shut down, is taking us so much further than if people were, giving lip service in the meeting and then refusing to do the work outside of the meeting, right? So being able to create a space where we can have that conflict openly, and it doesn't devolve into aggression. It doesn't become nasty in any way. It's just, let's talk about why this doesn't work for each of these groups and see how we can come to some kind of resolution.
Yeah. And by being so curious, even in the moment of conflict and conflicting interests, you actually discover really useful stuff, right? Sometimes, as you mentioned, you discover that there's a way that fits for both parties. And it also reminds me of a fight I had with my wife last week. And and that in that moment, I also feel like hey, I'm right. I feel some defensiveness, I'm triggered, but only if I'm able to keep on seeing, hey, we're the same team or organization, if you want to make it corporate. So as long as you keep that in mind, and as long as you see like, hey, it's not personal, we're here to figure this out together, and it only works if I calm down my emotions and try to understand her, be curious about what's not working for her and what would work for her. Only then I think we can find a good solution that works for both of us. But if I don't take that first step, it will never work, because it does become like aggressive, or we're not listening.
Yeah. And in a marriage, you don't have somebody to escalate those problems to, right? You got to figure it out yourself.
No, I'll try escalating to my mom. I'm not sure if it's going to work.
I wouldn't suggest that.
No. So yeah, you're also talking a lot about driving, bringing the business along, and in creating a partnership. Do you have any other ways how you do that? Because you seem to be a person who was always looking to create that partnership, to bring the business along, and to create a culture change as well with data.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that compliance is relatively easy. If you just want somebody to do something one time, that's easy, right? You can force people's hand to do something the way that you want it at all costs. But if you're going to stick around an organization, or if you want to build a reputation for yourself, you're really going not for compliance. You should be going for attitude change. You want people to feel positively about data. You want people to feel positively about your team. You want people to really enjoy working with you. And so that can only be done through building relationships and your reputation and that trustworthiness, where you are doing the right thing for the right reasons, that you are reliable to speak up when something isn't working well, to be honest when there is a challenge with something, because all of those things are sometimes scary to reveal. We end up being the messengers that we don't want to be, right? And so when we reveal results that are like, ooh, that's maybe not working as well as you thought, or we've invested a lot in this and it's just not turning out, it's not having the impact that we want, we end up being those messengers that bear the brunt of people, that initial shock or frustration or defensiveness, right? Of that can't be right. Your data's wrong. And that has happened to me plenty of times over the years, where then you get into that conversation of like, I'm on your team, right? That reminder, we're here together. I want to see this succeed. What did I miss then? Where do we go wrong? Is there a data quality error? Did we not consider another variable that should have been included? Or are we looking at too large of a sample? Like, what is it? And I wouldn't use those words in those conversations, because I'd be translating to things that make the most sense to whoever that end user is. But really showing them that the analysis that you're doing is never intended to disparage them or to take over or force them to do something that they don't want to do. It's really about making sure that we have that long-term goal and that we have that relationship where we can fall back on. It goes back and forth a lot, because the more you care about the data and the analysis, both from a data standpoint and the business standpoint, when they care about it, it becomes very, very important what happens. And so they are very invested as well, and making sure that they understand, even when we disagree completely and you're going to pitch your side and I'm going to pitch my side, and one of us is not going to get what we want, or one of us is not going to get everything that we want, we're still going to come back together next week for that next project, and we're going to work well together, and we're still going to make sure that we have fully thought through every implication of what we're doing, to make sure that we're making the right choice.
Amazing. Yeah, because I think it's such a shortcut just to try and push for behavior change, but then maybe it's once, but not really permanent. So I would love to switch gears a little bit to a different part of the conversation, because this is actually the first time I'm speaking to someone on the podcast who has done the training, or your team has done the training in this case. You were there as well, and I'd love to ask him questions around that. And the first question is like, why did you decide to hire us? And not us specifically, but why did you care about, like communication training? What was the challenge you've observed in your team, and you thought like, hey, I want to solve this?
So I read your book years ago, probably when it was pretty close to being fresh off the presses. And it resonated with me. Obviously, your book is well researched. It aligns with probably a lot of the things we talked about today. I can't remember. It's been a while since I originally read it, but I think that there's, it resonated with me. It was a lot of the things that I had been trying to get across to my team, whether it was by example or pointing out something here or something there. But when you're in the trenches working day in and day out, you've got a bunch of team members that are doing different things, and you're talking to them all the time. Trying to get these concepts across don't always resonate with the team in the same way as if you bring in an expert, you bring in a different voice. And, I don't have the whole program like you have to really help them start from the ground up. So everybody on the team, and I've joined many teams before, not many teams, but a handful of teams before. And you start off with, okay, who are the people that I have to work with? And everybody's at a different level, right? Everybody came into the organization in a different way. And when you're first a new leader in an organization, you didn't get to choose how any of those people got the role that they had, or whether or not they got a spot on the team, or what their salaries were, or what projects they were given. And so it's challenging. And for this team, I saw that there was such an interest in doing the right thing and helping the business and working together, and just a bit of a missed opportunity, right? I saw these missed opportunities where if we thought a little bit more about how we're translating that information to the end user, how we are approaching this from the beginning. And I think me telling them things like, you have to ask questions, and you have to ask questions when you get a request. You can't just turn around and deliver exactly what they asked for. Inevitably, they didn't ask for something because they didn't know they needed to ask for something, and it's not going to meet their needs, and it's going to waste your time, and they're going to think that you're not as, useful as you actually could be because you just didn't ask those questions. But no matter how many times I just say that in the moment, it's not a foundational training program that explains the why of it. And so when I found out that you had started this training program, I was very interested in being able to bridge that gap, regardless of where different people's communication skills and styles were.
Yeah, 100%. Because I also see that no matter where you are with your communication level, there's always room to improve, right? There's this crazy misconception about communication that, I've taken a communication class 5 years ago, so I don't need it anymore. It's so not true in my opinion, because I'm taking a lot of communication classes as well this year, public speaking classes with lots of improv, lots of different exercises, and no matter where you are, you can improve so much. So I'm happy you can see that.
I have a PhD in communication and I attended, right? Like, it's important to keep your skills fresh. And that's one of the things that I love when I have an opportunity to teach at the college level. I love just the intro to comm textbooks, like putting together my syllabus, putting together the slides. It's always refreshing to be like, oh, I forgot about that principle. Yeah. How could I, how do you just remember that these skills are out there? There's so much out there. You couldn't possibly juggle it all in your head at the same time. So.
Yeah, 100%. I would also love to talk about the results of the training. And I want to start with the negative. So what is something that could be different about the training? So imagine we would run this next year again for the same team or different people. What is something that we could improve or do differently?
It was a really strong training, so it's hard to say what could be done better or differently. I feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know.
Or what's something that
coming
could
to a
be
blank a little bit.
added?
I'm sorry.
Something that could be added, maybe. There's a lot of, so something we are thinking about a lot about is the rise of AI and ChatGPT. It's changing a lot of things, right? So what we right now build a custom GPT to see, hey, can we create this AI data storytelling coach? So that's something we're working on right now. We're testing it out. Happy to give a license to your team for the beta version. If you're interested, we can talk about it afterwards.
Yeah.
So that's something we're thinking about, because of
Yeah,
course it changes so
as far
much.
as new information or new, it was the right amount of information for the team at the time. We had two different cohorts, and it was a little bit hard to navigate like timing of things. Like really, the things that I would improve on have a little bit more to maybe a little bit audience centric as far as the like the administrative side of things, like more accessibility to links or like reminding people they still have their 40-hour-a-week job. So like fitting this in can be difficult. So thinking about how we can make that a little bit more seamless or accessible, I think is the only kind of feedback that I would give, because the content it really resonated. It really resonated. I had people every day reaching out to me and saying, thank you so much. I had this hunch, but it was great to get this validation, or I hadn't thought about it through that lens. Now I know how to tackle this new problem. So the content is really top notch.
Cool. I'm happy to hear that, because I wasn't there. The training was facilitated by Mike and Diana from the team. But yeah, it's pretty cool. And can you share a bit more about the impacts, like what you saw before, after, or what's the behavior change you have seen?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier this idea of the AVP. Of course, I don't remember what AVP stands for. Persuade is the last one, right? Really, how and as early as the requirements gathering stage, being curious and really wanting to know what's being very confident and asking questions. I think giving analysts a license to say you don't have to know it all. You have to work with the end user if it's going to have an impact. I think that was powerful for a lot of people to say, I am the expert in this field and I don't know it all. And that's okay. And I'm going to be more accessible if I build these relationships and work closer with all of these different people who are asking me things. They want something from me, then they're going to invest, if they truly want it, that they're going to invest that time in another conversation or two or three to make sure that we get it right. And so that was really valuable. I saw that right from the start. And then I also, and you have some really great videos that I've seen a few of them on LinkedIn also, but this idea that when you do just turn around exactly what they wanted, exactly how they asked for it, it's usually disappointing on both ends, right? You've killed yourself to anticipate every single thing that they could possibly want, and you wasted a bunch of time too, because that's not actually what they wanted, and they didn't need it as urgently as they said, and now you've wasted a ton of time and put 5 other things on the back burner that maybe would have gotten more utility in the long run. So that was definitely very powerful for quite a few people. And then understanding each other and our communication styles a little bit better, and understanding how to prepare for meetings as a result of that. And, really within our team more than anything else, we have a diverse team. Even though we're all analysts and we're all data nerds, we are still very different. We come from very different walks of life. Some have come up through the business, some have come through academia, some have come through, certificate programs specific to data and AI. And we all come with our own personal histories and our own, work histories and baggage from other workplaces that may or may not have treated us well or supported the data and analytics world. And so being sure that we recognize that that's not something that is everybody else's job to equalize. We are an equal partner in figuring out how to best communicate and hear what other people say.
Amazing. I'm always happy to hear from companies we work with what's the impact, because that's what I care about. We talked about analysts caring about the impact of their work. I'm the same, and also about the trainings we do and deliver. So that's what I love about doing these trainings and deliver them for companies and organizations. One thing I'm curious about is what do you see as the difference between the training that you've seen from us at MindSpeaking compared to other communication presentation skills trainings?
It's the only communication training that deals with data analytics, right? And that world, it is a niche world that is a huge niche though, right? Like there's hundreds of thousands just in the US alone in that space. And we do have a unique need because the work that we do, we might be individual contributors, but the work that we do is impacting, huge areas of the business, or is going directly to the C-suite on different things. And so how we communicate is of just paramount importance and very different than how other people maybe, climb the ladder, or the types of things that they need to share. One of the things that we are really challenged with on a regular basis is, actually just yesterday, we released our national data set for 2024 that looks at, what's happening across the landscape in our field. And that is really challenging because we have a lot of stakeholders. There's a lot of different external communication teams that need to understand the data and understand where it's coming from and understand how they can turn around and use it to best meet their needs. And that's not something that you see in a lot of other areas of the business, where we have these huge efforts to communicate broadly about something that they might not be an expert in, or they might, you actually have to be very detailed and maybe a little bit more technical to pick up the fact that, you actually said that wrong, or that's not actually the message you want to send in that, to that audience. And so I think it's just really, really helpful to have the analytics framework and understanding of the unique things that need to be communicated to audiences that have very, very different levels of data literacy.
Yeah, amazing. I completely agree with you, of course, about the uniqueness of the different of the challenges that analysts face, and also what I like about that is because it helps them make their work more valuable, right, or more seen, because they are brilliant people with a lot of ideas. So thank you for sharing all that feedback. Super valuable to me, and hopefully also to the people listening. I would love to end this podcast with one last question. So if you look at the things we have discussed, the different topics you've talked about, the tips you've shared, your experiences, what is one thing that you would like to end with? One message you would like to underline, or one thing you would like to conclude this conversation with?
Yeah, so as a communication person and a data person, I think it's really important and valuable to frame the work that we do in terms of everything is communication. You cannot not communicate. Everything you do is sending a message of some sort out into the world to your audience, even when you don't realize it, right? You might be doing something that you didn't realize it, and it's maybe not what you intended to communicate, but it sends a message, and that is impactful. And so when you do have control over the message that you are sharing with an audience, to be really thoughtful about it, that it's not manipulative to think about what they hear or what they need to hear or what they want to hear. It's competence. It's really understanding what is the best way that they can make the most use of what the knowledge that I have to share. How do I help them to understand the value that I see in this, whether it's understanding the analysis itself or understanding the impact that it can have on the business. It's the right way to go about it. It's not sneaky. It's not, it's happening whether you want it to or not. And so at least you can and should take advantage of that opportunity to make sure that you are having the impact that is necessary.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I appreciated your insights, your energy today, and the way you spoke with so much clarity. And I think that's an example for every analyst or data scientist. So thank you for making the time today, and speak soon.
Thank you so much, Gilbert.